Okay, good morning. We're just about ready to start, so if everybody can take their seats. Some of you will know that the advertised program has been changed a bit so that the first should be second and the second should be first. This is partly because both Alec and John Florescu have to leave early, so they'll start first. Alec will start first because he has to leave first. So we'll talk about Donald Trump and his effect on journalism. But before we start, I think John wants to have a brief announcement.
Yes, it was pointed out yesterday, it was very interesting, that in 2025 there are more journalists killed in confrontations that they cover all over the world. And the second most critical time was a year later in 2020. 24 was the first and 25 was the second. So I thought we should take 1 minute of silence in memory, given who we are and what we're about. 1 minute of silence to keep them in mind. Thank you.
Yes, one of my favorite topics. I spend quite a lot of time going back and forth to Washington, speaking to people about him, and some people who are close to him, although they no longer really want to speak to me because I'm a representative of the globalist media. Anyway, thank you, John, for that thoughtful moment of silence. Very, very lovely to see you all. Very impressed that you're all here bright and early after quite a late night. I'm not looking at any table in particular, but I know that some of the younger members of the audience, John, were up exceptionally late, so you should be very impressed that they're here. Yeah. So Trump and his effect on journalism. So crudely, if I was in the business of journalism as opposed to a journalist, so if I was a publisher and ran a big news organization and was trying to make enough money to run it and maybe even make a profit, then I would say Trump has been quite good for journalism. I remember the former chief executive of the New York Times, a man called Mark Thompson, who previously ran the BBC, and then he was running the New York Times during most, if not all, of Donald Trump's first term in office. And he very openly went around the world to media conferences saying the following two words: Trump bump, as in a bump to profits, a bump to subscribers. The New York Times gained a massive number of subscribers when Donald Trump took office first time round. The point being, of course, what do news organizations need? What do journalists need? They need news. We can find out news. That's the most powerful news of all, when we get scoops or exclusives. But also we cover the news. And again, if I'm really honest with you, if you were a journalist in Washington in the countdown to the last American election, 15 or so, 16 months ago, there was an awareness that if Donald Trump became president, you would be the busiest journalist on the planet. And if Kamala Harris became president, I think most people thought that she would be quite a dull president. I personally think she'd have been a better president than Donald Trump, but that's not the point in terms of news. So I guess we have to say that Donald Trump does make a lot of news, which is good for news organizations. But you'll be glad there are buts coming again, John. Number one, it's a huge dilemma covering Donald Trump. Donald Trump is speaking to journalists and posting on his own favorite network the whole time. What are you meant to do as a responsible news organization about this? He is the most powerful person on the planet. So traditionally, when the President of the United States says something, and traditionally it was not nearly as frequently as Donald Trump posts and pontificates, traditionally, of course, you covered what he said. Now, he's saying something the whole time, and I discuss this with my colleagues, and Polita may have a view on this. We go back and forth on this at the FT, because on the one hand, as I said, he's the President of the United States, so if he says something about Iran, even if it's absolutely the opposite of what he said an hour earlier, then you have to cover it. Because if you're the only news organization that's not covering it, then everyone is going to go to all your rivals. But what about when he says something about Tylenol? He had a campaign against Tylenol about six months or so ago, and it got lots of headlines and lots of attention, which is, of course, exactly what he wants. And then the story just fizzled out about 8 hours later when it became clear he was not really declaring war on Tylenol, and no very few credible doctors agreed with him. So I think point number one, yes, crudely, Donald Trump is good for viewership and readership, but poses massive dilemmas for journalists into how to cover him. More troublingly, of course, in terms of Donald Trump and journalism, he despises traditional journalism. He loathes it. He spent much of his life hating the coverage of his business and coverage of him personally. And now he's president. He's taking the opportunity to try to take revenge. And this is absolutely troubling. So I was discussing with some of the Romanian and Moldovan journalists yesterday about the sort of Trump assault via shouting fake news, which sort of debases journalism. He's moved on from just using rhetoric. He's now trying to use the law as well. He's using the courts. So he's taken on the BBC. The BBC did make a mistake, and they were clumsy in how they dealt with it. But they have apologized, and Trump is trying to grind the BBC's, I don't know quite what it would be, noses into the dust or whatever you do to a news organization. He's launched is it a $15 billion lawsuit against the New York Times over its coverage. So there's the courts, and then also there's the use of business people close to the president and close to the MAGA way of thinking. So I'm not sure. A show of hands here for who has heard the name David Ellison. David Ellison? Yeah, well, interesting. I say interesting because he's possibly become, just in the last 2 months, one of the most powerful media figures on the planet. So he is the son of the tech tycoon titan Larry Ellison. He's in his mid-40s. He set up this media company, Skydance. They now control CBS and CNN, two of the giants of American media. And there is very little doubt, and I suspect John will have thoughts and far greater insights than I have into this. There's very little doubt that his intention is to make them much more favorable in their coverage of Donald Trump. So there are sort of massive effects on journalism and the independent media in the US that are still unfolding. Final thought, John, and John on my right, and then I'll hand over to John on my left. Donald Trump is also, though, he is an enigma in terms of communications, because he speaks to journalists the whole time. He does open himself up to questions, which is, of course, what journalists want. So I was listening to Dan Perry yesterday, who was my fellow panelist, and he was coming in from Jerusalem, and he was talking about Netanyahu and how Netanyahu hasn't exposed himself to any serious interviews for a very long time. Well, Trump has decided that he will answer questions practically whenever he's asked. And one of my colleagues got hold of his mobile number a week ago, rang him up. There must have been some form of coordination with the White House, as in the White House press people surely knew that Trump was planning on taking this call, or maybe not, but whatever. My colleague rang him up, had 8 minutes with him on the telephone, and he talked about Iran and NATO and so on. Well, I mean, no other American president has done this. Again, Palitra and I both worked in Washington, and we're recalling how getting a question, one question to the president traditionally was, I mean, it could take months and months of planning. So he is a bit of a conundrum in terms of communications. I think I should stop there, because you will have lots of questions, and we want to hear from John.
Before the other John starts, people know him as a prolific director, but he was also, in a previous life, he was also communications director of the Democratic Party. So, John.
Thank you very much. Thanks, John, for that introduction. I have you see Nikolai here. We almost lost him at the airport in Munich yesterday. And I also want to thank the colleagues that agreed to move from one session to another to avail our schedules. It's always a bad idea to follow Alec, because his points are always slightly better than your own, and they're articulated in a very convincing way. Anyways, I want to go into some fundamental observations I had, which Alec touched on and some of other people have touched upon. Number one, I think it's good to point out the philosophical view, the point of view of Donald Trump. I take you to the first cabinet meeting at the White House when he had all members of his cabinet there, and they were asked to comment on the president, and they said, well, we're just delighted to be working for him. I mean, it reminded me of a Ceausescu scene. Everybody was completely head tilted. And at the end, a reporter said, he said, well, have you had a debate? Are you any discussions? And they all froze like that. And no one wanted to step up. And the president said, well, there's nothing to debate. We've just been elected with a huge majority. So our job is to go forward on the mandate that we have. So fundamentally, he believes at a certain level that he has been given a clean direction of his own making over the next 4 years. The fact that he goes out with Truth Social, his own network, is his way of communicating directly with the American public. And you're absolutely right, Alec, is that, you know, it's extremely difficult dealing with the White House. I've had a chance on interviews and so forth. It's highly structured and so forth. But here he walks out of Air Force One in the back. They open the door. Somebody's allowed to stick their head in, and he talks to them. And Bolton pointed out in the interview that you saw the other night that he believes that international affairs is a one-on-one business. If I get along with Putin, we're going to solve this thing. Disregard history, disregard whoever Putin really is and whoever Trump really is. We're just dealing one-on-one. So these are sort of fundamental shifts in the way the White House works. The second thing is he's used the instruments of government. Alec pointed out that he's brought all these lawsuits against the BBC and a number of people, against legal firms that he didn't like, against cultural institutions like the Kennedy Center, that is now the Trump and Kennedy Center. And I'm sure Jack Kennedy would be turning in his grave to think that what he called culture is anything close to what Trump regards as culture. But they also use the instrument of government. to get rid of, we're talking ADR in Germany, to get rid of PBS. I was a long producer for PBS and did a number of series for PBS, and it's gone. It's completely gone. So PBS as a national public television entity is no longer funded. Some of the big stations may survive, like Boston or New York or Los Angeles or Chicago, but that's about it. There are 358 stations in PBS. The other thing is NPR, which is something that most people watch, and listen to every day. Extremely good. It's part of American history, broadcast history, and so forth. And that also is under, with a tourniquet on its neck, and so that may well disappear. So the instruments of government, the character, the way he views his election, his mandate, and then the other key thing is the friends, the circle around Donald Trump. The people that are now accommodating Donald Trump represent the biggest powers in not only American media, but global media with impact in the UK. Of course, Fox is an American company, as an example. And I'll just go through them. There's Comcast. Listen to the networks: NBC, CBS, MSNBC, Sky in the UK. You have Disney, ABC News. You have Paramount, Oracle. We were mentioning Ellison, CBS, and 60 Minutes. You have Warner Brothers Discovery, CNN International, Executive John Malone, who's head of Liberty. And you have Fox, Rupert Murdoch, Fox News, and the various entities. On top of that, leave aside television, broadcast TV, which, by the way, I may point out, has diminished significantly in terms of viewing numbers. You have podcast. The biggest one in the world is Joe Rogan. It has 28 times the audience of CNN, about 30 million. You have The Daily at the New York Times, which has been a very successful thing. That New York Times is run by the Sulzberger family. You have Ben Shapiro, Tucker Carlson. These are massive audiences. And it was interesting that Trump was shrewd enough not to turn to his advisors, but to his son, who is about 20 or so. And you say, well, who should I talk to? Well, Dad, go speak to Joe Rogan. He's got a huge audience. Go speak to this guy. They've got huge audiences. Those audiences 20 years ago used to be on radio, huge audiences on Rush Limbaugh on radio. Now they're in podcasts. And then the other media people, who are they? They're tech people. Take Meta, Instagram, Facebook, WhatsApp, and guess what? X, who knows where Elon Musk actually stands? He was close. Love-hate relationship, who knows? And TikTok. Who saved TikTok? Donald Trump. Who's going to be under the influence of TikTok? Whoever emerges as the ultimate owner. So all these facts fundamentally change the game of journalism. And they change it because they change the ownership, they change viewing habits. Viewing habits are shifting around. And we're in the midst of this because right now the biggest deal in American broadcasting of $110 billion is in play. It has to be okayed by the government. And the people that are going to be benefiting will soon be in the executive suits. But now there have been any number of shows that have been canceled, people who have left because people were just a little bit nervous about offending Louis XIV, if you may. And he sort of feels, as I said at the beginning, that I won this election. This is my mandate. I'm open to discussion, refreshing ideas to some extent. I'll listen to anybody. I'll talk to journalists like that if I have the time, and that's it. So anyways, there's opening remarks on the subject.
Thank you, John. We also have Dan Perry, but I think we haven't got him coming in yet, as far as I know. Hopefully we'll have him come in later on. Okay, well, hopefully he got the message and will come up in the next hour or so. Meanwhile, before we open it up to discussion, I'll play the well-known part of speaking up for Trump. And I will put in my own but into this. It's all true about Trump. He's a real asshole. But the three people he's taken on or intends to take on, two of whom he has taken on militarily, are Venezuela and Iran. And he's now also threatening Cuba. In the case of Venezuela and Iran, the leadership of these countries have massacred thousands of people. It isn't as though that he's simply against them. He has confronted them militarily, and in the case of Venezuela and Iran, he's decapitated them. Most people who talk about this say, well, nothing to do, I don't trust Iran, but he shouldn't have done that way. The question is open, what way can you do it if you want to get rid of a leadership which has for decades set the tone for terrorism in the Middle East and further. So I think these have to be taken into account. He's talked about Cuba. Cuba hasn't yet received the Trump treatment, but it's broke, and he thinks he can change it. So my own view is then, Trump, as I say, is a terrible man, but so far his enemies have been those who should be enemies of democratic states. Over to you, please. Who wants to come in? Or you want, yeah.
Can I come in briefly?
You want to refute this?
I wouldn't dream of refuting the great moderator, but I mean, Trump has also taken on the European Union. He despises, loathes, abhors the European Union. He hasn't tried to decapitate it, but he has confronted it, and he has threatened a member state of the European Union with taking some of its territory. Now, obviously, a threat is very different to waging war. But I think his antipathy is not only for authoritarian states. Anyway, but happy to take questions.
Over there. Okay. Thank
you. In terms of the effect Trump is having on how journalists do their job, can you tell us how you think the American media is evolving in terms of how do you respond to a president who just glibly lies? Like when he was first elected, they didn't know what to do. They sort of reported, as the president said today, that up is down. And then they didn't have the confidence, I think, to say this is not true. I mean, where are they now?
Well, I think that the large organizations, or news organizations, journalist organizations, there are two notably, which are the New York Times, the Washington Post, I'd say I put the FT actually as in the Wall Street Journal as sort of like the thought leaders in terms of journalism. They're each having their own confrontation. So on the one hand, Donald Trump is being suing the New York Times. On the other hand, he invites New York Times journalists in the office and spends quite a bit of time talking to them. It's sort of like a shadow war, punching back and forth. In the case of the Washington Post, it's a whole different situation, because Bezos has decided to be compliant with the wishes of the administration, and so there's been nothing but upheaval and huge cutbacks at the Washington Post in the last 2 months. So here is one of the venerable newspapers of the United States, famous certainly during the Watergate situation with Woodward and Bernstein, and celebrated editors, and all that glory is gone. The number of bureaus across the world have been cut back significantly, not just at the Post, but at the New York Times. So I think they're each trying to maneuver and deal with them. They need access. They need to report. He's the biggest story they have, and the New York Times, I'm sure, feels that he's just saying whatever he wants, disregarding the truth. And Trump feels, from his point of view, that the New York Times is trying to screw him every day they can, just about. I mean, the feeling is mutual. It's distrust. And I think that applies pretty much with the front-running newspapers in the United States.
Can I come in very, very briefly, just following on from what John said? I think actually it's sharpened up American journalism. I think, as you were suggesting, Peter, journalists are now much more. This is reporters I'm talking about, not opinion columnists, are now being much clearer in how they describe what is happening to their readers. I'll explain what I mean. I remember being based in Washington and being very struck, this was 20 years ago, by the way that the Washington Post and the New York Times reported on American politics. And it was, to go back to what Donald McIntyre was saying yesterday, there was a lot of this sort of he said, she said. And as a reader, if you knew nothing about what was going on, you weren't necessarily very, very clear as to who was in the ascendant and who wasn't. And there was a particular moment in the election race between John Kerry and George W. Bush when Bush's acolytes were politically killing John Kerry over allegations, false allegations about Vietnam. And it was sort of presented as some sort of academic debate. It wasn't. It was crude, tough politics. And the British journalists, who traditionally tended to be more direct, just said, Bush's acolytes kind of hammering Kerry. And the New York Times would be saying, John Kerry yesterday did, but, it was very, very kind of above the fray. Now, American journalists are absolutely calling out lies and referring to them as lies. That's a good thing.
And I'd just add to that unfortunately that habit is not occurring at the networks. So the networks that are owned by different owners are not only lording over large broadcast units, but also movies. In the movie industry, Paramount as an example. And if you remember the movie that was done on Trump's life with the guy, Romanian-born Sebastian Stan from Constanța, it was about Trump's ascendancy in New York life. And it received a Oscar nomination, and it had the hardest time in the world to actually get out. Any number of major studios turned it down because they didn't want to offend the boss. And believe me, I'm sure that came from, the top levels. And so in that sense, the journalists have been more courageous and more forthright than what we've seen in another domain in media, which is the networks. And also the most compliant, I'd say, have been the tech companies.
Thanks, John. Who's come over there?
Should we take two questions at once?
All right, fine.
Yeah.
There first, and then lady next to you afterwards.
Thank you so much for your insight. I was thinking about the moment when AP was banned for refusing to use the administration's chosen terminology, for example, the Gulf of America, and it sort of signaled a new era of conformity for journalism. How should newsrooms balance the need for physical access with their ethical refusal to adopt state-mandated vocabulary and words? Thank you.
You got that? Second, yeah.
As we saw in different press conferences, how Trump was humiliating and intimidating women's journalists, how can we respond to this guy, and how can we protect each other as a journalist, because it's not a normal thing, because he's the most powerful man in the world. He is increasing credibility in our local politicians and the populists, and as well they can make a movement against us as journalists, just to intimidate us, as he doing with journalists in the USA. So this is my first question. And the second one, why Trump is praising Putin, but threatening his allies in Europe, in NATO states? What do you think about it? Thank you.
Can you say again, just to clarify what the first question was again?
How can we, as a journalist, can protect each other's by not being? How can we respond by not being intimidating by the president of the United States?
Okay, we're going to take that.
I'll take it. Go ahead. I'll protect each other. You take the rules.
Okay. Thanks, Sandra. So the issue of access and ethics is really, really good subject, actually, because fundamentally there are two different ways of getting stories out of a government or let's say a business. There's the front door and there's the back door. And the back door tends to lead to better stories. And by the back door, I mean you speak to people within the organization who tell you stuff that's going on, maybe bad stuff that's going on. The front door is you speak to the Secretary of State, the Treasury Secretary, the Chief Executive. We do need to do that as well, because they may say something which sets the news agenda. So what do you do when there's a price for that access? Well, then you say no. I think well done the AP very early in the administration for setting exactly the right tone and saying, if this means we're not going to have any access to the president, it's a principle that we believe is more important. So I think you just have to stick to your principles, even if it means foregoing the interview with the much coveted interview with the president or whatever.
I'll just give one anecdote about dealing with powerful political people that try to get in your hair. We were doing an interview with George Bush the elder at Kennebunkport when he was running for president, and it was done at his house in southern Maine. And my team we had set up a makeshift studio in the house, and my boss David Frost and George Bush, who wanted to be president of the United States, were on the balcony in the front. It was a nice New England day. Big gray waves from the strong Atlantic up there. And Roger Ailes' team, he was the advisor, later to be head of Fox News, was on the left-hand side, myself and my team on the right-hand side, watching monitors, watching cameras. And David started asking Bush about how he dealt with, in a religious sense, with the fact that his daughter Robin had died. He wasn't looking for tears. He was just looking to try to understand the level of the president's belief, or the VP's belief in God, what role he played. And anyways, Roger Ailes, who was responsible for his image, did not like it. And I was next to him, and he was literally to stop this. And I said nothing. And it was continuing. And the president, want-to-be, was looking in Ailes' eyes as a weak man, getting too emotional. And he said, if you don't stop this, I'm going to walk into the shot. I said, if you walk into the shot, we're going to air it. And finally, they picked up. And 6 months later, Roger Ailes calls me up and says, hey, listen, can we use that shot? Because we never were able to get an emotional moment. And we have the Republican National Committee, and we're doing a bio. I said, listen, we don't sell our stuff to political parties. We're a news organization. So not to pat ourselves on the back, but I think that's the kind of attitude you had to take when you get heat from the officials. And that's happened a number of times where people call you after the fact. You didn't mean to say this. You didn't mean to say that. I remember a funny one where we obliged, whereas Bush Jr., when he talks, he says R a lot, recording him live, R. And we're editing the thing, say there's too many R's in it. It's boring. It looks tedious. And so somebody calls us up and says, can you wipe out the R's? Well, we already had wiped out the R's, the lack of fluency in the discussion. So I think that people just have to stick by their guns. Good journalists know how to be good journalists. There's a code. There's a way of behaving. There's a way of responding. There's no cozying up. There are rules of understanding. We did an interview that was done at Camp David after the Gulf War. That is still held until most of the people who were alive, pass away, and so that will come out later. It's held by the White House itself. In terms of how do we protect each other and going forward, I'd just like to point out that I'm not as pessimistic overall, because I believe that this president is entering what they call the lame duck period. That's when you've been in the White House twice, it's the second part of your second administration after the midterms. The midterms are in 8 months. And all of a sudden, I think the power to the president as well as to MAGA will start bleeding away. It will bleed away because that's the way politics works. they're always looking at the future. He will no longer be a man of the future. He'll be a man holding on to the past. His legacy will unfold itself just the way things happen. And names will start appearing up. Guess what? They already have, both on the Republican side and on the Democratic side. And that will bleed out a lot of the strength and the power of the administration. Combined with that is the fact that I think the president himself is suffering from a sign of diminishing health and diminishing vigor. Laura Ingraham had a very interesting piece the other day where she was watching very carefully his movements, his hands, his relying on the shoulders, his relying on stock phrases he uses, sort of laugh lines, and not anything original, like he's running out of gas. So I think there's an element that you saw with Reagan in the second term that he had weakened. Reagan in the second term, that administration, Stockton and others were simplifying the decision-making so he would understand what was actually going on. So to be forward-looking on the thing, I think the media and the journalists have to just grit it out and play as strong as they possibly can, because I think a balance will come back.
Can I give a 30-second answer to the very good question about Putin? I think Trump has in the past admired Putin. He sees a man who can get things done and move swiftly, even if it means breaking things. I think it's that simple, really, and he he despises the European Union.
Who's next? Hand there.
Just very briefly going back. Okay, was saying about the networks. I mean, how agitated should we be about CBS? And I mean, there's been quite a lot of publicity around Barry Weiss's takeover of CBS News. And I really wonder two things. In the context of the wider media scene, is this now, you know, as a terrestrial network, not so important? But if it is still important, is it going to survive that sort of, if you like, political twist in the coverage, going to survive Trump and be a permanent feature of the media landscape?
Barry Weiss, who was at the New York Times before, was considered a bit, going out on her own way and not complying with the editorial direction of the New York Times. At least that's the way I interpret it. And so she ends up being head of CBS News. One of the first things she does is cancel or delay a 60 Minutes report, which was embarrassing, I guess, to the new owners of CBS. And that's a stunning thing. So you have people who are thinking of leaving 60 Minutes and leaving CBS News and voting with their feet, going out the front door saying, listen, this is not my game. The other fact is that a lot of the regular newspapers are fast disappearing. I don't know if one of you last or been into New York City. I have a hard time buying the New York Times in New York City. There used to be kiosks. They don't sell them in kiosks anymore in New York. You basically, have to go to Duane Reade or something like that, a pharmacy, to get the New York Times, or you have it digitally. So the emergence of digital news journalism is completely taken over. And so the distinction between print journalists and other kinds of journalists is lost. I was delighted last night talking to my colleague Alina from Moldova, and she told out something quite interesting. She says their largest newspaper in Moldova is now shifting public opinion because it has a pro-European view. So what happens is that family members of Moldovans, as a gift, make their mums and dads subscribers to the newspaper, and after 6 months they start to have a different view of things from traditional newspapers, not from digital stuff, from traditional newspapers, which I think is an unusual twist.
Donald, one other thought. You ask about the influence of the networks. They are, of course, massively reduced in their influence compared to their heyday. So this isn't nearly as significant as if it had been happening in the 60s or 70s when the majority of Americans got their news from the nightly news broadcasts on the networks.
Good morning. I'm Dan Dragicescu. I'm working with John on some geopolitics projects, and actually regarding journalists around Trump. Trump must have favored journalists and some others which is hating. He's nothing in the middle, I believe. Can you tell us about the journalists he likes? He did give any positions to them and time and like a political advisor around him, if that has happened already. Because I know a story about Trump nominate diplomats, not career diplomats. And he's quite pragmatic. I think John knows a story about that, how one of the American ambassadors was nominated in Bucharest. So if there's any case, if you know any journalist preferred by Trump been on his team, and political team recently.
Can I go first, John? Because I'm afraid I'm then going to have to cut and run. So he's very close to Breitbart News, the Washington bureau chief of Breitbart News, a man in his late 20s, speaks to Trump most days. And he's very happy, again, interestingly, he's very happy to talk about his conversations with Trump. These are not all on sort of deep background or off the record, as traditionally would be the case with conversations with the president. So he's very close to Breitbart. But he's also close to, I mean, as I said earlier, he speaks to journalists in other news organizations. You were talking about diplomats and so on. Yes, absolutely. This is not a great time to be a career diplomat in the State Department. It's a great time to be a political envoy. I'm afraid on that slightly downbeat note, I'm going to have to go. I would just like to just say, while everyone is gathered, that it's been an amazing and very inspiring weekend. Nikolai, Pamela, and all your team, thank you. But I'm most inspired by all the journalists I've met from Romania and Moldova, who I look forward to staying in touch with. And I'm going to fly back to London feeling optimistic about the future of journalism, thanks to my conversations with you. So thank you.
Okay, who's next?
I'll just answer
Oh, sorry, I beg your
the
pardon,
second
Tom.
part of that question. Most of the American diplomats appointed to Western Europe are political appointees. That's been going on for some time. Certainly, they are, the idea of a U.S. ambassador traditionally is to select somebody, a political appointee, is to select somebody so the president can call up and say, tell me what's really going on. So they don't have to rely on State Department, they don't have to rely on CIA. They call one guy and give me the skivvy on this. What's going on in Bucharest, Budapest, Berlin, and so forth. So the criteria for these political selections is somewhat the nature of diplomacy today. It is done over the phone, it's done in text, it's done on the fly, it's done off of airplanes, which will make a very difficult job for historians to try to piece the whole thing together. So that is what's really changed in terms of people that he's close to. Newsmax is another, even more slightly to the right than Fox News. But the one thing you would give Donald Trump credit for is that he's unpredictable, sometimes in a refreshing way. I'll just pick up the phone and call up your various journalists, and they're stunned, they're delighted. I can tell you they'd be delighted to get a call for Trump. Any journalist would be. And he'll say, yeah, this is what I think. He sort of has a plain-spoken way. Seems crazy to me. When he was talking about this guy from our intelligence community who said that the United States was falling under the influence of Israel's lobby in the United States, he sort of ignores it. Tucker Carlson speaks to the person to find out what's going on, and Trump says, he's a nice guy, but he really doesn't know what he's talking about. Usually that's what he does. He sort of makes a joke out of somebody. It happened with Jeb Bush. When Jeb Bush was running against him the first time, the president's brother, he was the governor of Florida, he'd say, they'd be at the dais, they're all there on the stage in a national debate, and he'd say, look at this guy, Jeb Bush. And of course, Jeb Bush does look a little tired. This guy's got no energy. I mean, he's a disaster. And so people start chuckling, just as you did just then. The guy's a total disaster, Jeb. He's low energy Jeb. So he worked out this phrase, low energy Jeb. And that night, on all the late night shows in the United States, The Night Show and so forth, everybody was picking it up. And the next day, low energy Jeb announced an incredibly busy schedule to sort of offset. But the damage had been done. He had turned him into a clown, and not a clown, but turned him into somebody, a derisible sort of figure.
Next. Nikolai, over here.
With what you and Alec were saying about the U.S. media as it is now, as Trump's popularity wanes, which it seems to be seriously waning at the moment, principally due to the war, and his non-attention or inattention to economic issues and the cost of living and so on. Do you see how the press is now? The press wants to reflect what people want to hear as well. Do you see the power of the press now, as it is now, actually really going for Trump and pulling him to pieces?
I think the Americans are pragmatic people, first of all. I think that they gain strength in their partial victories against the White House, or against what's perceived as abuse of the White House. And I think the U.S. audience and the U.S. public can shift enormously quickly on issues if they're unhappy. Many people are unhappy with the woke stuff, and many people are unhappy with the immigration situation on the border. And the immigration situation got everybody riled up. People in Texas of all Democratic, Republican things thought it was excessive, and that the Biden administration had made some serious mistakes there. And in that sense, all of a sudden, that problem was resolved. Better there, it occurred more quickly in the United States than it did in Europe, which still is dealing with the immigration issue, so to speak. Political parties are still playing that card. Now it's sort of off the table. No one even crosses the border from Texas anymore because you'll be sent back immediately. So the American system somehow responds, like on the question of excessive pandering to woke legislation. For instance, in California, if you were 13 years old, you could actually go to the state government and get authorization to take puberty-delaying drugs without even notifying your parents. Well, most people said, "Hey, this is gone way too far." And all of a sudden it changed. It changed at the local level because in state legislatures could say, this is just not on. We don't accept this. We don't like this. So the ability for the United States to shift, to change direction and use its power and respond to the issues of the day shouldn't be discounted. And that's why I say when people lose hope in the United States, they shouldn't, because I think that the American public still sort of exists as the way Nixon used to say, a silent majority is there. I was talking to a Texan the other day in Houston. Texans from Houston tend to be conservative. It's oil company and oil country. And they were saying, this guy says, John, we kind of think the president's talking too much and thinking too little. Well, that's an understatement for a very deep change of attitude. And I think that will occur in New York City, where the New Yorkers found a new mayor who was not born in the United States, a Muslim, and all of a sudden he won. He beat the machine with Cuomo and all these people who were there, all the power, all the money of real estate investments in New York City, the people that own the buildings. Well, the guy who was offering free bus service, discounted stores, all of a sudden was elected by what, 30% also of Jewish voters, by young people. I mean, I was at the New York Marathon, and I was looking at hundreds of thousands of young people watching the marathon, and 2 days later there was the election. And 2 days later they had this guy who came out of nowhere who's elected mayor of New York. So the ability of the United States to change never should be underestimated. And that's how come I say that we shouldn't get too overwhelmingly worried about what's going on. There's a limits to what can happen. Ownership becomes a big issue here, in terms of all these networks. But in looking forward, I think that there's reason to be optimistic. My guess is that the Americans are going to look for the antithesis of Donald Trump. They don't want bling bling in the office, Oval Office. They don't want gold. They don't want huge things. They probably like a Harry Truman type of model, a simple American from the Midwest who actually has leadership qualities. And I don't know where that figure is right now, but I think the public has had a little bit enough. It's not common in the United States for a chief executive, the man in the White House, to make a fortune from his position and the position of his closest advisors. I mean, I've never heard of a situation where we're dealing with international negotiations that are handled by financial buddies and family members. So all that strikes most people as extremely wrong. And I think those things will be corrected. The lady in the green.
Lady in the green? Yeah.
Alina.
Oh, Alina, yeah.
Alina.
Thank you. My question, I'll give you the date of the problem, and then I would like to know your advice, what is next. So we have Trump, some of you named today him like the powerful man in the world. And we have social platforms, and their owners are in top 10 most rich people in the world. And in the same list of top 10, there are AI owners and so on. So when these top platforms control most of the informational space in the world, and they are friends with the most powerful politician in the world, where is media and what can we do? Because the most powerful politician attacks media in a very difficult way. And I'll tell you, we suffer of Trump's attacks on media, and he never maybe knows. When he said that USAID is a criminal organization and stopped financing last year projects in Eastern Europe, let's say, we lost 40% of our budget, but it was not the worst problem. It was the worst loss in our history, but not the worst problem. Immediately, the Russian gangs took the message saying Ziaro de Garde is a criminal and all the journalists are criminal and Alina Radu is a criminal. They are using criminal money to do a criminal thing for Moldova. And there was a huge smear campaign I never had. And all my effort to build something in my country was equal to zero because these well-paid digital Russian gangs operated happily on American platforms attacking media in Moldova. So what next? What do we do when platforms are controlled by powerful politicians in the world and by Putin's money? Thank you.
Alina and I talked last night mostly about her daughter getting into Harvard and her success there, but she also spoke seriously about some of these issues. What she just mentioned about the dominance of the digital space is significant. If you go to Meta, social media Meta, they have 3 billion viewers. Okay, 3 billion viewers. If you go to Axio, which is an American news organization, pointed out that if you add the viewers or the listeners who watch the networks, the New York Times, and all of the, thinking, is less than 1% of the American public. Okay, less than 1% of the American public. So we're looped in on a conversation where we check our phones for the latest article here, for the latest report there. But most people aren't part of that conversation. They're living a different reality. And I think that why I'm optimistic is I think the public will respond because they have a certain kind of good sense. They feel that something's not quite right. And I think that will manifest itself in the House elections and the Senate elections. I don't want to diminish the importance of having those kind of friends and having those people who are sympathetic with your ideas. Of course, that's huge. And we'll see to what extent they try to twist the game. But a lot of people are moving away from broadcast television. When I was producing in the United States, the networks at nighttime, if you had a 23% share of the audience, that was pretty good. So that was what NBC, CBS, ABC had in those days. Today, that's down to about 6%. So that's how many people watch network television. Because you don't have to watch network television at 6:30 or at 7. You can just check in on your phone all the time and get the latest, what you need. So the game has shifted in such fundamental ways, and I'll add another element to it, which I've observed as a producer with Dan and my colleagues in Bucharest and London, is that when we undertake a documentary, we have to research very carefully, all our facts, and then a script is written and the script is reviewed for accuracy, and then it's edited and it's color corrected and it's sound and music and everything else, and then it goes out. And then what we're observing is the assumptions that we made about the viewing public, whether they be in Romania or in other countries, may be over-optimistic. We're not quite sure if the viewers, the younger viewers, understand who was on whose side in World War II. We discovered the other day when we were airing a show, a program in Moldova, and they were talking about the Versailles Treaty, and we talked about the Versailles Treaty, and we talked about Bolshevism, and Dan was next to me, and I said, I don't even know if they know what Bolshevism is, and I don't think they do. So what I'm saying is there's a fundamental dumbing down that is occurring among the viewers around the world. So we're locked into a dialogue that doesn't connect to the Joe Rogan viewer who has, 30 million viewers every time he goes on the air. They are of a different generation. If you go to the West Coast, my son was at USC, University of Southern California, and I remember going on campus. And I was looking around the campus, said, what a beautiful campus, interesting place, very media connected. And I noticed that everybody looks a little different from a coast, let's say if you're going to Dartmouth or Georgetown or Columbia. And because so many people are from different ethnic groups, they're Asians, they're blacks, they're Hispanics, they're whites, they're everybody, and everybody looks not like the normal white European American. The West Coast is very different from the East Coast and from the center of the United States. So most people don't even remember World War II. I mean, I don't even think they're going to celebrate those dates again. They don't celebrate. It's because it's past. So the country is becoming ethnically more diverse to begin with. And second, there's a whole new generation that thinks very differently and fed off different kinds of educational things. So when you're in my business of producing TV shows, you better think twice before you say, Vietnam and Vietnam a war, waged in Southeast Asia. It complicates how you do things, but the difference of age generation and the makeup of the United States in particular is becoming far more diverse. Changes things additionally, and the dumbing down thing, because people go to social media more than the New York Times or Financial Times is a very big factor.
Just before I come to people here, I just wanted to put back to you what I said earlier, and that is that Trump has decapitated two hideous countries. And he's also tried to stop wars in Gaza and in Ukraine. He hasn't succeeded. Is there not a complexity that we're missing by simply saying, here is a horrible man? I think in many ways he is a horrible man. But he has done some things and is trying to do some things which are admirable, are they not? Or does the horribleness overcome any complexity that we might see in Trump and Trump's power? Please.
So my question on that is, I agree with you. Some of these people are horrible. I'm happy to see them gone. But I don't know if his impulse is really about having those people gone so that there's going to be some rising democracy as opposed to this is a pure business transaction. Because there hasn't been an interest in, maybe it's good it may have avoided a civil war, but in Venezuela, it's essentially keeping the same leadership in as long as they're a bit, pro-American on oil or whatever. Same thing in Iran. You have essentially, I think there probably was a wish that the opposition would rise up and be able to overthrow the country. That didn't happen. And so, and the same thing in Cuba. It seems that currently the discussions in Cuba are to potentially get rid of the leader, but still keep more or less the same people in place, which maybe is better because often when we try to overthrow countries, it tends that there's civil wars and a huge number of people die. But from a democracy perspective, do you think that they're actually true, that his impulse is really about democracy and the people, or just more of a straight business interaction, which could still be defensible from an American perspective?
I'll come back to that, but anybody want to take that on? Yeah. Paul.
To your thesis, that perhaps Trump is, taking on manifestly evil regimes that, should actually be taken down. Well, doesn't he just pick the ones that he can pick off? Why would he not turn his attention to Russia, which is, waging a dreadful war on Ukraine? And why would he not turn his attention to China, whose Communist Party presides, over a system that we all find anathema? So, don't we have to just ask ourselves whether Trump is not, in fact, just punching down? This is, and that in a sense too, it's performative, demonstrating what he loves most, which is his own power.
Okay, who wants to come in on that also? Yeah, please.
Good morning. I have a very practical question. Mr. Florescu, you slightly mentioned Newsweek channel. As you might know, this media company recently has been introduced in Ukraine. And in coming days, they are going to start the broadcasting. What do you think? How can they impact political landscape? Is their mission in Ukraine has regional impact, regional ambitions? What should we expect from this market changing? Thank you.
Just to clarify, just give me, I didn't catch the beginning of your sentence.
Newsmax.
Newsmart?
Yes, American Newsmax starts they work in Ukraine.
American Newsmart. Oh, Newsmax.
Yes,
and what about them?
They recently opened, they launched their project,
yeah.
And in coming days they are going to start their broadcasting, and we are curious how it will impact our market and our public sentiments.
And Newsmax, which is running in your country?
Yes.
Which is?
Ukraine.
Oh, Ukraine. Okay. Let me just hold on a second here. Newsmax. Let me deal first of all with the question to my left, having to do with how Trump, chooses his battles and why he's doing certain things and why not. I go back to the interview I showed the other night with John Bolton. And so John Bolton spent a lot of time with the president one-on-one, so he's worth listening to. I don't think he understands how his mind works, but if anybody gets close to it, it would be John Bolton, certainly in respect to international affairs. And the two things that strikes me, he has no sense of history, and he has no sense of strategy. So these engagements internationally, I think of the nature of he can get a quick hit, like in Venezuela. He can pluck out of somebody and take him and put him in jail in New York City and hopefully get a compliant government, which he sort of appears to have. Then that's a nice formula. Few people died, happened fast, effective, but you're not quite sure what you've got. I mean, so she's now going along with us in Venezuela, so it seems. I think he likes those kind of operations. And I think that's what was in mind in Iran. Looks like, maybe, the Israelis telling me, we got all these guys at some big confab meeting. We can knock them out. And the counter regimes, those people who were suffering tremendously and killed just by the thousands a little while ago, maybe they'll come to the surface. It was a huge gamble. It doesn't look like it paid off. But if you take Neil Ferguson, who was also on the other day, he had written an article and said, be wary of operations when you're trying to dislodge regimes. History points out it doesn't really work. It doesn't really work. So the idea that he could somehow knock off the leadership and the top leadership doesn't necessarily mean a win in Iran. It doesn't look like it's a quick operation. Trump likes quick operations, and I'm sure he's saying, who gave me the stupid advice that this might work? Who gave me the odds, the chances that this might work? I think he thought it could possibly happen. He took a chance. It may pay out. Doesn't seem like that. But when you're dealing in the Oval Office and making decisions like that, you normally rely on the instruments of government to advise you. And he has not. I mean, he deliberately goes to sort of handpicked individuals to advise him how to move forward, or family members on how to move forward, and he's ignored a lot of the advice of institutions or agencies that have been there since Second World War. So at that, you function at some risk. In terms of Newsmax in Ukraine, and also what Alina was saying about Moldova, which I'm quite aware of, about the Russian propaganda that is going in. I mean, here you have Russian propaganda that's going out through social media, heavily financed by Russia, much more heavily financed than the information going the other way, and it's having a big effect. And from what I understand, it's continuing, and it's intensifying. And Moldova itself is kind of a laboratory for testing messages, anti-Western messages that are then used in other parts of the Balkans. So there is an effort, of which I'm partially aware, to try to push back on that. The Newsmax in Ukraine, I don't know too much about that. Newsmax is a very small, I would say, a very small news organization in the United States. It's a marginal, on the right organization that it is not very impactful. I don't know exactly what they're doing in Ukraine. Well, I'd be curious to hear that, because I didn't know they do that. I know the bureau chief of Newsmax in Washington, and these guys, they tend to be older people, strong Republican supporters. But keep in mind, the Republican Party and the MAGA crowd is heavily split on the war. Because if you recall well, when Trump ran for office, he said, we have to stop these incursions in the Middle East. It's America first. Stop wasting money and lives and everything else. So he's running the risk of doing exactly the same thing. He hasn't lost many lives, but certainly he's engaged the United States. And the MAGA people his circle, which is half the United States, don't like it at all. So those splits, as I was saying earlier about the likely turn of the politics in the United States, those splits will intensify if this kind of activity continues. And I would bet my bottom dollar that Trump must be furious about the way this is going.
Polito, you wanted to come in at one point. This will have to be the last one because we've got to have a break and then go to what had been the first session.
Thank you. I'll be very quick. I guess I wanted to challenge you a little bit on the idea that everything is going to bounce back to normality. I know that's not exactly what you said, but I mean...
Is this John?
Sorry.
Yeah.
John Floresco, not John Lloyd. Not challenging you yet. Well, wait till the break. I think I completely agree that a lot of the political momentum will drain away from Trump if he does really badly in the midterms. However, it seems one of the really distinguishing features of this Trump administration compared with the last one is that the last one, people were able to see it as a one-off, and indeed, Biden came in, it did turn out to be a one-off where normality resumed pretty quickly. This time around, I think it's been striking to see how many people are really worrying now that despite what you're saying, what John Bolton is saying, I recently interviewed Paul Ryan, former Republican House Speaker, and he also was saying, look, just relax. America is a big, complex country, and we are capable of having something like this and passing through and getting back to normality. And just, the rest of the world just needs to settle down, chill out. It'll be okay. Yeah. And I wonder, though, actually, when it comes to the media, it's the shaking of institutions that has occurred with the media and then with all others is basically going to be quite difficult to build back. I mean, how long is it going to take to build back NPR, PBS? What happens now that David Ellison has a really big footprint in mass media? Isn't it going to take a while really to return to the sort of normality we're used to in the US?
That's a good question. I'm speculating, obviously. I could be entirely wrong on that. What I look at is House races and Senate races and what's going on in the states, gubernatorial races, because that's a pretty good indication of what's happening at the ground level. And I think there's a decent chance that the House will go back to the Democratic side. Can't be sure about that because Trump uses his political power. If anybody steps out of line, Trump uses everything he can. Like if a Republican is being a dissident in the party, he'll find somebody else well-financed to run against that person. But having said that, I just think I was reading Axio the other day, and they were talking about in America today. They say, okay, only 1% is actually reading all these elite stuff. Most Americans are giving to charity like never before, more than $500 billion last year, an all-time record. Most Americans are contributing to public service, local service, whether it be the library or the sports clubs or raising money for different charities, which is a very American thing at the grassroots level. I was raised in Massachusetts, and you always did things where they're useful to the community. I think that good sense is there. Now, if you're dealing with the networks and the ownership of the networks that I was talking about earlier, I think they're very much influenced by who's in power right now. And if the things change at the top as they did just when Trump came to power, they will change again and accommodate and have different relationships with the way they run their operations and the kind of things they think that's important. I think fundamentally the United States is changing enormously. I always point out, I have two sons in Manhattan that give me a daily briefing on what's going on in New York. I find it in America that I don't even recognize the way things move forward, the way jobs are done, the fear of AI, the enormous infusion of money. America is very wealthy. The extraordinary entrepreneurship in new technologies and space exploration, I mean, it just pops up everywhere. And so what we're seeing is a shift in society, in my view. It's like we had a shift in society at the end of World War I, where the world was reorganized in Versailles. We had a shift in society at the end of World War II when the United States stepped into Western Europe and bolstered the West European nations. We had this change in society in '89 when the communist regimes fell, which we talk about a lot. I think this year of 24, 25, 26 is one of those shifts in society that's occurring that we're only seeing the signs of it. We haven't begun to understand what it means.
Thank you, John, and thank you to everybody. We're going to have a break now, and then what had been the first becomes the second. So are we ready to step into the? Yeah. I'm sorry that we didn't get Dan Perry in it. We might get him in later on something else. But thank you very much to John and to the absent Alec.
Thank you very much as well, and thank you to Pamela and to Nikolai for arranging these gatherings. Thank you.